There's really an adaptive approach to ads that is best where you scale, you test some things, you see how that works, then you decide what to do next. And sometimes that can be conflicting when you're dealing with people who are thinking, we have this planned out, detailed list of things we're going to do this year. Ads are not task based. Running ads is not a task. It's not you do this and then it's done. It's this ever evolving thing that's based on the market and the competition levels.
Sean, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm really happy to have a conversation with you today around all things media mix optimization, agency management, paid search. Would love to give the audience just a brief background into who you are and some of the work that you do. So, yeah, let me know if you can give a 60-second kind of high level overview of your role at Keepers and your experience.
Yeah, of course. So I've been in paid media for almost 8 years now. I used to work for some really large enterprise agencies, managing a lot of household name accounts. Nestle, Deloitte are just a couple of names out of a long list. And I eventually left and decided to start my own agency. So because we're a smaller company, we deal with a lot smaller companies than Nestle and Deloitte per se, a lot more SMBs and medium-sized businesses. But I run basically Keepers is my business. We're a small PPC agency specifically specialized on Google ads and Facebook ads for a wide variety of different business types.
I definitely want to talk about the differences in working for large brands at a large agency versus working for smaller brands at a smaller agency, because there's definitely nuances there. The experience that you had at Group M and Mindshare is valuable, and for the audience it may be helpful just to contextualize some of those learnings of working on larger teams. Maybe you're working with a specific like micro business segment within a larger company. What are some of the more impactful takeaways that you had in those larger agencies?
Yeah, I think, well, it is night and day difference. Let's say we're talking about Google ads in specific. Aside from you're still doing Google ads, there's a lot of rollover in terms of strategy. But some of the differences I would say would be, was that the question around differences primarily?
Sure, sure.
Yes. Okay. So, one of my takeaways, I guess I was part of it too, was some of the biggest takeaways from the corporate world are that you really have to manage expectations. That's I would say is one of the things that I learned there. I would say I mastered it. Really feel like I mastered that, and that helps me in our everyday business nowadays. Is at the corporate level, you really need to manage expectations because you might be dealing with a brand manager or the marketing director of a business or a line of business, and what they're expecting has a huge influence on whether they're happy with what you did and whether they're happy with what you do. So, and that really is a huge thing in with small businesses as well, is basically there's a lot of nuance with something as technical as running ads online. There's so much complexity and nuance to it. And if everyone's on the same page and you are very clear about what's going on, what we're shooting for, what we're capable of doing, what we're hoping to do, then that's something that translates perfectly to small business as well. Um, I would say the relationship management is something you really master at a big level because you're not dealing with a small account where you might send them a small update or a couple updates or even have a small monthly call talking about a few details. You're talking to these companies constantly and you're talking to them about a wide variety of things and you're educating them. You almost half your job is being an ad manager, and the other half of it is dealing with people and dealing with relationships. So that is a huge thing that I think is really helping me nowadays that I got from that world, other than just being decent at ads as well.
Sure. The expectation setting part of a role is, I feel like it's obviously crucial in all roles, but specifically when you are an external agency trying to get things done and you don't have all of the internal levers at your disposal, it becomes quite complex. Specifically, if you're trying to drive goals that require internal effort and change and things like that. Have there been any experiences with specific clients at um, the larger agencies you were at where there was a disconnect between the goals that you were trying to strive for and the requirements on their end? And like, how do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. And, even if I relate this back to what we're doing nowadays, we do have some decent sized companies. So I'm not saying that we don't have companies where there's a marketing manager part of a greater team. We have a variety of companies of that size. But, I would say that, just to be completely honest, the corporate world has much more. They're not coming to us as the experts saying, I really have no idea, but I want good quality management. What is there to expect? They just set targets. It's basically we did this last year, let's beat it this year with this kind of a target. So I think there are a lot of times, very often, to be honest with you, where just really lofty targets were set for us. And they're just decided by the brand manager or the marketing director. And, we have to do our best to achieve them, but they're not really working with us in that way sometimes. More it's kind of like, well, we did this last year, we need to do this year. And it's not necessarily based on communication or intentionality or saying or forecasting. It's just based on hit targets.
Can you think of anything specific? Like I'm thinking about just like a example case study right now. It could be that a business is going to say, all right, we did this amount of revenue last year and we have to hit this new target this year. But then in that is assumptions around what their conversion rate was for their product, what CPMs were, what competition was like, all these external factors. Can you think of an example of like when the expectations were too high and how you kind of had to communicate that down a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I used to run ads for a company called Desjardins Financial. Anyone in Canada will know who they are. They're a really large financial institution that sells insurance nationwide and does some banking as well. I think they do some stuff internationally across borders. And yeah, I back in the day I used to oversee their Google ads, and they're ultimately the marketing director. Sometimes they don't have experience with PPC, right? They are they're not exactly somebody who's been in platform and knows the nuance of it. And I think a really classic one is, hey, we've achieved this cost per acquisition at this ad spend. So that's awesome. That's actually pretty good. We hit our targets. They're profitable leads. So let's just scale our spend, and we'll scale it according to this regimented, media plan where next year in February we'll lift to this, next year in April we'll lift to this, and that lift in terms of ad spend. And anyone who's in a media buying position, at least for a company that is really maximizing ad spend possibility, we all know that cost per acquisition often will rise as you're scaling. And you can do things to keep it down, but there is diminishing returns as you just try and crank ad spend to the moon. So that was a common one, I think, is people just hoping to retain the same level of cost per lead or cost per client when that changes, and I think that is one thing in the corporate world that can be tricky is everything is forecasted and budgeted and planned, but media is hard to plan these days. It fluctuates so much. I don't know if you saw this, Paul, or anyone else listening, but in March there was the big fluctuations with Meta, just large fluctuations in acquisition prices, and you can't forecast that kind of thing. And you can't forecast when, again, I think this is kind of a conspiracy. I don't think anyone's verified it, but you can't forecast when Temu or Timu, whatever it's, however you pronounce it, when they decide to pump billions of dollars into ad spend, and it just impacts everyone else's costs per CPMs or whatever. So there's really an adaptive approach to ads that is best, where you scale, you test some things, you see how that works, then you decide what to do next. And sometimes that can be conflicting when you're dealing with people who are thinking, we have this planned out, detailed list of things we're going to do this year. Ads are not task based. Running ads is not a task. It's not you do this and then it's done. It's this ever evolving thing that's based on the market and the competition levels. And that can be something that is hard to, I mean, that's not even, no, I think the corporate world maybe has a little harder time dealing with it because it's so structured. But that's something that I think a lot of businesses struggle with in planning their advertising.
100%. I think a couple of tactical learnings from that could be always keep diversification in mind, never be over reliant on one channel or one strategy. And I say that with a caveat. If you're a smaller business, a lot of times you can be perfectly fine running just paid search and be profitable. But if you're going to be operating at scale, that's a challenge. Algorithm changes, macroeconomic factors, competition, the presidential election. Like there's so many things that you are not in control of, that you can structure a campaign, but it's going to a ever changing auction that has a lot of different dynamics. So, yeah, I think diversification's important there. And then also just being able to pivot quickly and not be too over reliant on these numbers. Like I think one way to say that is, yeah, forecasts need to be malleable. And I've seen that the best companies are able to respond when we're not hitting forecast. Well, we make changes, right? Based on that. Maybe we make pricing adjustments. Sometimes companies need to make changes in headcount. Sometimes people have to kill products, but that's just the reality of the beast that we're in.
Exactly, right? I have a couple clients who just finished Techstars in New York, and they are seeking investment, probably going to get some, and they are, their investors are looking for really strict plans. And it's something that there's been a couple of investors who understand that, and they're really malleable in their approach to growth. It's not my decision. I'm not advising them in any way because that is not my realm of expertise, is who to take investment from. But I see those investors as people who get it. They're people who know how to actually grow a business, and they're not behind the forecasting too much. They're more about let's find out how to grow and do it. Sometimes you need to have that mentality around this kind of thing.
Can you think of any examples? Obviously, you worked with tens, if not hundreds, of enterprise clients. What's like the North Star, right? Or what example of a client can you think of that you were like, these guys just were dialed in. They were doing everything right. Their strategy for optimizing media, for optimizing their business was complex. Yeah, from your experience, all the clients you worked in, what's like the top of the mountain?
That's a really good question. Deloitte actually had a pretty good campaign. To be honest with you, they're super dialed in with it, which I think makes sense. They're ultimately a really big consulting firm. So they have very specialized knowledge. They understand how to look at things from a data driven approach. So they understand the importance of setting up a detailed collection. I would say, in my experience, they were one of the best. Again, I was based in Canada at Group M in Toronto. So we did deal with a lot of clients internationally, but we also dealt with a lot of Canada's biggest companies. I would say one of the other, probably the two other highest performing, or ones that were the most dialed in, were the Weather Network, which is a really big weather channel. They had a really unique approach where they got paid a certain amount per impression for ad dollars. So we managed to get Google ads. It's a super unique approach, right? It's not based on acquisition of customers, but if they can get people to their site for less than what they get paid per impression of an ad, then they can just scale and generate revenue. And we had a really sophisticated thing going on there. To be honest with you, this is a client I did a little bit of work on back in the day, and I ran into a friend in Toronto. I was in Toronto for Collision Conference a few weeks ago, and I ran into them. And I heard about a few strategies they're doing, but H&R Block was really impressive when I was helping with their account back in the day, and it sounds like they're doing some of the most sophisticated stuff with Google Ads I've ever heard, to be honest with you. So it's just very data driven. There's a lot of they have basically full on data analysts as part of the Google Ads team, which I think some companies do that, but not. Then the analysts are really creating really wild strategies of, this audience sees this ad at this kind of a time in the user journey. This audience sees this kind of an ad at this stage in the user journey, and there's just so much data behind every single ad. in every single decision. And I found that really impressive. And that's something that they've bolstered over time, I think. Again, I don't really know the specifics anymore, but it just sounds like they've doubled down on that kind of thing. Yeah. Another one I would say is Crave TV. They're kind of like a Netflix, a smaller Netflix, but only in Canada, I believe.
Obviously, leveraging data, hiring data analysts, super important. Something that I'm looking a lot more into is leveraging MMM or media mix modeling in conjunction with incrementality or matched market tests in conjunction with attribution to come to some level of answer. One of the challenges I think now is that segmentation and more technical adjustments on the ad platform level are going away. We have automated targeting, we have less ability to do exclusion audiences. Google has performance max campaigns, right? Like, how do you think about that kind of dichotomy of the scale and the opportunity is in the granularity, but then you're losing that to some extent with some of these platforms?
Yeah, I think it's pretty, if I bring it back to what I was saying about audiences, in theory, if you have your audiences dialed and you're doing that externally and you push those into your platforms and you run those campaigns there, I think you can still show the right types of ads to the right types of people with some level of control through external audience creation. I don't necessarily do that anymore because we're not dealing with those mass enterprise customers. Truthfully, at for a small medium business level or a medium sized company, like most of our clients have 100 employees or less. Let's put it that way. A lot of them are 20 to 60 employees. So that's kind of the scale that I'm dealing with a lot these days. And I think that those types of businesses, I think a lot of marketers, there's this love hate relationship with a lot of the changes in Google Ads. I think probably more of a hate from a lot of media buyers. And that's fine. I think I'm the same. It's very situational. There's sometimes it's a little bit frustrating that you can only do things a certain way and you can't control it. And I'm even seeing some examples very randomly where, but yeah, basically, when it comes to what I think, truthfully, I guess what I'm getting at is I've leaned into some of that. It just is the way it is. I don't have data analysts at my disposal. I don't have a whole team of some of the smartest data analysts around at my disposal to really get into that nitty gritty methodology. And I just lean in. And if I can provide PMAX as a good example, we all know it's an omni-channel ad campaign type where you lose a lot of control. There are some cool scripts, you know, I don't know if I'm sure you probably are aware, and some of the other people, there are some interesting scripts you can put in your account that do influence where PMAX spends. So you can spend a bit more on search or a bit more on other places. Those do exist, and we do utilize those and see some success. So you can try and control it, but if you ultimately, to really simplify it, it's an AI machine learning model. Um, and if you feed it the right data, it can sometimes do really good things for you. So I've just started to try and lean in and go more into the conversion tracking and nerding out about that. How can we track the perfect step that then if we get these black box algorithmic campaigns to optimize toward? And some of the best results I've had all year are from that type of an approach. So as much as it can be annoying, it also, I think, by just leaning in and embracing it, sometimes it just is the way it is. It's not like it's going to change unless every single marketer bands together and Google somehow decides to revert back. But I think that's a long shot.
I want to talk about the conversion actions. What are some of the scripts that you're leveraging?
To be honest with you, I'd have to lean on my team a bit for that. I think one of those is a Mike Rhodes script, like a really common one that a lot of people use. Yeah, I'll be honest with you, I don't know the names of them off the top of the head, but a lot of them are. There, let me put it this way: there's a lot of pretty well known PMAX scripts that help with PMAX. One of the great things about ChatGPT is you can ask it to generate scripts for you. So just like people, you can ask it for code, you can ask it to generate the code for a script. So one thing we've been experimenting with is when we have a unique idea of saying, hey, this specific thing would be really good. Let's just say that our campaigns do better when it's raining outside. And there are scripts for that. You can dig around on the internet, try and find them, or you can just ask ChatGPT and get a script within seconds. So we've been really diving into just testing out a lot of like, I guess in theory they're custom made scripts, but just keep in mind if you do that, it sometimes doesn't work the first time, and you have to go back and say, hey, it didn't work this way, fix it. And then you kind of got to do a couple rounds of revisions with it. But I think ChatGPT is getting better at that as well.
And then on the conversion action front, I'm assuming that you're meaning kind of splitting out conversion actions more granularly, passing back revenue values, segmenting them out to look at only specific user types, et cetera. But talk to me a little bit about your framework. If I'm a marketer in charge of Google Ads and I'm thinking about optimizing conversion actions, what things should I be thinking about?
Yeah. So I guess I'll say first and foremost is that I like to have conversion actions for every step. And sometimes even more than that. How much time did somebody spend on this page before they did the action or something like that? The more the merrier, because then even if what you're telling a campaign to optimize toward isn't doing what you want and you have to test another action, you as the marketer can see the funnel. You can basically see it very simply in the platform of this is where people drop off. And people, we might like to think that's not our job, is to optimize people, UX design, let's say, of CRO, whatever you want to call it. Some people, there's no right way. Like some marketers do it all. Some marketers just do search campaigns within Google Ads. Some people do all Google Ads. There's no right way or wrong way to do it. But in my opinion, it's just bringing value. And if I can easily see where people are dropping off, I can easily just tell my client that and come up with a CRO or UX design improvement. And I don't have to be a UX designer. I can just see that that's a bottleneck. That has helped me provide a lot of value to people, is just tracking everything. Yeah, I would say it's pretty much tracking every step, and it depends if people are using a CRM. It can be really customized, right? Some companies it's all on a web-based application, like let's say a credit card. It's a web-based application, people are filling out the form, and you don't necessarily need to be in HubSpot or Salesforce to see the steps. You can just track the pages. But sometimes it's all in HubSpot because it's like a lead for a high ticket service, and then the sales team is following up with that lead multiple times. So simply put, we it often involves Zapier or Make.io, but we will usually try and we set it up so that HubSpot or whatever CRM can see every single lead that came from a source. And then every single step along that user journey gets sent back into Google Ads or Facebook ads as a conversion. And then you know, we might optimize towards step one just to get the momentum, and then step two, and then step three, and then step four. And eventually you hit a step where it just does worse when you hit that step. You've gone too far. Then you go back and you've kind of obviously, again, like I said, it's an ever evolving process. It doesn't mean it's going to be that way forever. Doesn't mean that as the sales process and sales team doesn't get better, that you don't go back and try optimizing towards step five again. But it does mean that for now, it's not going to get the performance is peaked by optimizing towards that step. So go to that step and then start looking at other things too.
Yeah, like you mentioned, just the concept of diminishing returns earlier. There are events that you can optimize towards at specific spend levels. And then as you scale, other events open up because you have more data from those events to be able to optimize. It might even be within a specific event, like you mentioned. I want to optimize for an email submit. Okay, that's working really well. Now I want to optimize for, email submit that also fills out this specific section or is from this specific area or whatever event parameter you want to pass back to give a indication of quality. So that makes a ton of sense. And I think this kind of conversation we've been jumping around in a couple of different areas, but it just makes me think like from a stoic perspective, you have to be able to play with what you have. And if there's going to be more automation in certain aspects of what we call digital marketing, you can find the ways to manually change things with different event parameters or scripts for PMAX or whatever it may be.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like this is something you and I've chatted with about in the past, but where I think marketing is heading, and this is an interesting, like almost, I guess you could call it philosophical. It's not really philosophical, but it's like a debate around where technology is heading. But let's use PMAX as an example, or even just max conversions bid strategy. An AI model is effectively replacing tons of manual tasks we used to all do as marketers. And to the layman, they might look at I mean, and I've heard this before: is, hey, marketers, why are you guys still charging so much? You do 10 times, like you do 30% of the work you used to. But marketing is not a task. Again, PPC is not a task based job. It's this ever evolving thing. So if everyone's using these AI bid strategies that now effectively replace a lot of the targeting and changes you used to manually have to do as a marketer, it doesn't mean that we don't have to do jobs. It just means that now this is the baseline of the playing field. So what is the new thing that makes you stand out and makes you do better for your clients? And it just means there's more different things that you have to be ahead of the curve on. So I think, like, sure, PMAX is now automates a lot of things and you lose a lot of control. And but that's just the way it is. There's nothing you can do about it now. What is the new differentiating factor? It's going to be like landing page experience, create the creative, setting up these full funnel marketing campaigns that are really unique, like a unique top of funnel message that matches a mid funnel and matches just getting the things that we did a little bit on now become the things that we need to really spend a lot more energy on. And I think those are the things that are differentiating our campaigns these days, at least, is like really nerding out on the pages and the creatives.
Right. It's like we have new tools at our disposal, and so the top 10% or the top tier will be those that use those tools the most effectively. If you're not using ChatGPT, you're now in a minority. But then within ChatGPT users, there's going to be a hierarchy of who is the best at using ChatGPT to do marketing, right? That's something that I think a couple of the times we've connected, I was really impressed by your utilization of generative AI in conjunction with kind of virtual assistants, distributed teams. Talk me through a little bit about that journey at Keepers and how you have really built out a distributive team that adds a lot of impact across different various businesses.
Yeah, yeah. So just curious, what do you mean by distributive? You mean like just want to clarify that first.
Well, I know that you utilize virtual assistants a lot, and also just working with different channel managers distributed across different areas. Right, you're not all in one location.
Yep. Yeah, yeah. Okay. That's what I thought you meant. Yeah. I have to give a lot of credit ultimately to my business coach. Can't remember if you chatted with him. Mike Moll is kind of a genius, and he's really transformed my company with a lot of hard work for myself too. He's the advisor, or was for a long time. But basically, yeah, I think a lot of the entrepreneurs that I knew when I started this journey, probably half of them were digital nomad type people. So it might just be related to the fact that they were my influence and they're doing really well, but they are people who are all over the place and they hire people from all over the place and they're fully remote teams. So yeah, I think it all started truthfully with me hiring a couple Canadian people first. And one of them ultimately left and got a full-time job. And that's completely fine. That was a pretty early stage of my business. The other person didn't work out and it was a pretty bad experience for me. And then I hired two guys in South America and it was awesome. And it all started from there. It's just kind of this realization that there are really talented people all around the world. I would say the difference is they maybe have had less experience, less opportunity to hop into the corporate world and deal with, like, let's just say group M level work, working at a big corporate agency like Dentsu or Group M or Gale or something. They're just as smart as us. They just don't live in places where those are like everyday job opportunities. So if you can take someone who's just as smart as yourself and teach them to be as good as you, it doesn't really matter where they're from. Obviously there are requirements. Like, my everyone who I hire is perfectly fluent in English. And you wouldn't even, it doesn't matter where they are. They speak English just as well as anyone else. So that's obviously, a non-negotiable when have a somewhat client-facing business, but or very client-facing, but some roles are somewhat client-facing. Let's put it like that. Yeah, that's how it started. And then I ended up hiring a VA, and same thing, I didn't hire her based on her having all the specs. I hired her based on her being ambitious and smart and excited to learn. And she's become like so amazing at her job. Like she's so good. I invested a lot of time in training her, and it's the same thing. She's equally as smart as anyone else. She just hadn't been in a role where she gets to learn all this technical stuff that we do every day. If you're hiring for a role, do they have to be someone here or can they be somewhere else? And not to say, I have people all around the world. I have a girl in Portugal, I have a guy in Calgary, Canada, a guy in Toronto, Canada, um, two people in South America, two people in Philippines. And there's more people as well. There's another guy in Vancouver who's part-time. So it's a pretty distributed team. Basically, I don't go into a job search. I go into almost every task thinking, how can I systematize this? Like it has to be a system or else it's not scalable, right? You can't just say, when we'll figure out how to do it every time. That is not a scalable thing because then you have to be involved every time. You don't know if the quality of the output is going to be good every time. It could suck sometimes and be good other times. That stuff can really hurt a business. You can't leave that up to chance. So everything needs to be systematized. And then the systems become, well, do I need a person to do that? Or do I need a freelancer to do that? Or will ChatGPT do that? Or will an AI model do that? And so in thinking about systems, I always naturally gravitate to, can this be automated, fully automated using software? And then can this be something I hire someone for? And the answer is different for everything, but that's kind of a methodology I take to everything is to be able to grow a business, you have to buy back your own time with systems. And people are systems. When you hire people, you hire them and you go, this is the system for doing this. You're now in charge of this. You can have autonomy and do it your own way, but we just have to have a predictable system and it has to follow these guidelines. So I could talk about that all day, but there's a lot of directions you can go with that conversation.
Yes, for sure. Maybe just to take a step back, if we look at keepers as a system within which there's many microsystems, how would you categorize kind of the top ones, and what does that hierarchy of systems look like?
Yeah. So, ultimately, we manage ads for people. So I have a specific guidelines as to, this is how often we give people updates. This is how often we will have calls with these. And it depends on the size of the client for updates and call frequency. There's a system for that. So there's also a system for updating me, sending me the updates. At a certain point, the company got big enough that I had no time to do anything. I had no time to focus on business growth. So one of the guys on the team became a senior ad manager. And basically everyone goes to him for questions so that I can buy back that time. So now he has a regular cadence of everyone on the team goes to him for specific questions about their accounts on a regular like monthly or bi-weekly cadence. So yeah, there's a system for everything. There's a system for outreach. I have two VAs who help me with outreach and managing my own time and my own email inbox. So there's a system for, this is my email inbox. Just review everything, see if I need to answer it, if it's an email for me or if it's just a technical thing or if it's something else, and push it into the filter or the folder that where I know that I have to respond to that so that I don't have to spend time reviewing all my emails. There's a system for outreach. There's a system for reviewing job posts on Upwork and then how we respond to them in the best way. Um, and systems take a lot of time to develop, but ultimately, if you were to really break down, and this is like the 4 hour work week preaches this kind of thing. There's a really famous book called The E Myth. I think Traction even breaks this down. Like a lot of entrepreneur books say it. And I'm convinced that this is kind of what business is you find out a task you need to do, you figure out how to do it, And then you go, how do I create a process so that we do it this way every time so that we get a good output every time? And then once you have that process, you can put somebody in there or some kind of software in there to get it done for you. And then you can move on to the next thing. And you just kind of constantly are building. That's a, yeah, that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think like systems building as a skill set is a one of the most highest leverage skill sets you could develop.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. I've met some pretty amazing, yeah, through this world, I've met some people who, I think I guess I'm good at it because I've been able to grow a business based on systems, but I meet some people who are significantly better than me at it, and it's just mind blowing what you can do when you can really master systems. Um, my downfall is I don't like project management software. I just don't like that. I've got a notepad with my to do list every day. I think some of the people who are the really best at it are the people who can master they can basically look in Asana or Trello or Notion, whatever you use, and just see the rundown of an entire business. And they can wrap their head around all that. I hire someone for that because that's not what I like doing. I like kind of being the creative mind behind the company, I think.
What's your system for managing cash flow, profit, finances at a high level?
Yeah, good question. So, I have my project manager basically look at all our expenses every month and all of our revenue and where the expenses come from and categorize that and put it in a spreadsheet. So then, to be honest with you, I'm actually working on how to improve this even more and make it on a weekly basis because right now it's on a monthly. Because, look at it this way, we're all data driven people. That's how to do a data driven management approach, I think. Is a lot of people call it a CEO dashboard. What I do nowadays is I can go in and I go, okay, January, February, March, April, and I can go, oh, my expenses, my people expenses just shot up that month. It also tracks how many new clients we got, how many clients we lost, what is the growth in revenue from those new clients. So it tracks like everything. And then by doing that, you can go, okay, something changed. We made less money this month. What caused that? And then you can just see exactly what caused that. And you can go, okay, well, what happened was we had higher churn than normal. So then again, by tracking everything, you can see the bottleneck. And it makes it a lot easier to, if you're just looking at a business and you go, I don't know what's going on, like we just made less money this month and it's been on a downtrend, you're shooting in the dark, you know? If you can track things, you can optimize them. And I think a lot of problems, again, it's easy for me to say, but I think sometimes business problems are really challenging. But a lot of times, like if you have less leads that month, if you go into your spreadsheet and you go, I spent a whole bunch on new software tools, then you can easily just go, okay, I like experimenting with new softwares to see what will change the business, but I'm going a bit too crazy. I just need to be a little smarter. And sometimes it can be as simple as that. That can solve the problem that your company has, but you're just not even aware that you're overspending on software because you're not measuring it.
Do you have a North Star? Obviously, within the CEO dashboard, there's a million metrics that you can look at. Sometimes the challenge of the thought of what gets measured gets managed is that there's only so many things that one human being can measure and manage on like a in their brain. Maybe certain brains can fit in more, but I wonder, yeah, like what are maybe the top five, or what are the more important KPIs that you're looking at that are keeping you up at night?
Yeah, so I basically have like a profitability metric, like ROI. So that's probably the main, obviously the most basic ones are how much revenue or how much profit happened that month and the ROI. Those are probably the literally the two main ones. Yeah, those are probably the main ones. I would say the ones that keep me up at night are the lead based ones because leads make or break a service business. So I'm always like, if we have less leads one month, and this is probably the anxiety of just being an owner, is if we have less leads 1 month or 2 months in a row, I start to think, oh man, I need to start doing something. Like, and that's just, I do think that that's probably Something that I'm actually working on is to not just get overly anxious in those moments and not go, oh man, this whole business is going down. I think that's a thing a lot of people with young companies go through, because you just haven't had the years of experience to know that it's going to be okay, to go through it over and over and be like, it's fine. Just having doesn't mean the a few leads less doesn't mean the business is going to die. But I would say that to summarize it, that's the one that keeps me up at night. I like to really keep a close eye on those and be careful.
It makes sense because you can look at profitability and ROI on a less frequent basis. Well, they're lagging indicators, right? So like you could look at them every day, but are you making daily changes to affect them? Maybe not. And like even with lead inbound lead volume, that's a lead indicator. You can make decisions tomorrow. But then the question is, should I look at this weekly? Should I look at this monthly? Should I look at this quarterly? Am I looking at it too frequently? Should I plan out my lead strategy on a quarterly basis? And those are questions that business owners have to ask themselves.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Lagging indicators. So you got to keep an eye on the things that are signs of where you're going to be next month or the month after. And some of that stuff is even wrong. Like, you could have two leads one month, but they're the best leads you've ever had, and one of them closes, and your revenue jumps up. So there is an intangible effect there too, where it's not a perfect measurement system in something as nuanced as selling one person to another person.
Yeah, it could be like opportunity size leads multiplied by opportunity size, potential revenue volume, or something like that. Last couple questions. We kind of hit on this a little bit, but I think it's such a like fascinating discussion. If we think about businesses as a system, inputs, outputs, our output is revenue, client satisfaction, client revenue, right? Inputs all of the tasks and things that we need to do to get there. I like the breakdown of thinking about like per hour tasks. There's things that are high leverage that might be worth more as a value, things that are low leverage, simple, repetitive, recurring tasks. And if you think about this on like an individual human perspective, it's easy to break that down. But then ChatGPT and like generative AI kind of throws a wrench in this a little bit, because there are ways that you could think about ChatGPT as like this high leverage thing that can do strategic thinking for you. But I've also seen mistakes happen from that, over relying on ChatGPT. I don't know if I'm how to kind of frame this question in the in the best way, but I'm like, where should we be using ChatGPT, generative AI today? How do you think about this, you know, task delineation from high to low leverage, right? I want to just spiel on that for a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really good question. Maybe I'll tell this story really quick, but I have another website it is a business. It's just a pretty small scale one about mindfulness. I think we've talked about it. It's basically it's a growing opportunity, and it's a thing I'm passionate about working on. And so I'm working on the SEO in the background there. And as soon as ChatGPT came out, I immediately thought to myself, you know, there's these little moments in history where you can be some of the first people doing things, and they can be really beneficial. And it kind of makes me think of blogging. The first people who had blogs, just their websites ended up being giant publications, and they have effectively created these crazy businesses and companies about their passions. And it's just because they were the first people doing it. So when ChatGPT came out, I never was like, this is going to completely change my life. But I was like, I don't think many people are using this to create blog posts for SEO yet. So I just jumped in and started creating tons of blog posts there. And my website traffic went up like 300% in like that since ChatGPT came out, basically on that site. And it's still growing, just not as fast. Nowadays, there's a lot of changes where Google isn't rewarding you as much for AI written content. But if you look at it this way, if you just go in there and you go on the SEO front, you go, hey, write an article about meditation, just because my website's about that. It will just spit out some generic article that's boring and it's just repetitive info. But if you go in there and you curate it and you go, I want an article about this with this kind of a tone, can you please touch on these three things and utilize this specific sentence here and make it curate to these keywords? And then you get it. and you go back, you read it, and you go, okay, change these few things, or you do a little bit of human edits. It still only took you like 40 minutes to create an article, or 30 minutes. It's still a lot less than a written article, but you won't get good SEO results from just the write an article about mindfulness. Like, you need to give it guidance and give it a lot of, telling it what you want. And then I have articles that are written by AI that are some of my top ranking articles on that site. So I think the ethos of AI is it can answer your questions really fast. Like, when you have simple questions, you can get them really quickly. I asked my I've been networking a lot more. I'm just finding I get a lot of work from network. And I like that. I love socializing with other business owners. So I'm like, this is awesome. I'm just going to do a ton of that over the next year. So I asked my VA, my lead generation specific VA who helps me with business development. I basically said, hey, can you just look up some events? And I'm already leveraging her time, but she's leveraging her own time because she just goes and asks ChatGPT for a list. And that's a big way that we're doing it nowadays. But a lot of times, and this is just a little sneaky trick, is I basically almost always ask ChatGPT for references. I'm really into surfing, and I was asking it a couple questions about a surfer recently just for fun because I was like watching a documentary and I was like wanted an answer, and it just spit out something completely wrong. And it's done that to me a ton, where it just makes an assumption based off information, and its assumption is completely wrong. If you ask it for a reference and you go, "What is the answer to this? But please share where you found it," and it it doesn't give you those assumptions. So I do like to I use it as much as I can. We use it as much as we can, but you got to be a bit careful nowadays with it because it still will spit out assumptions, and that's my little fix for assumptions is just ask it for a reference.
Right. Yeah. I love that. It's another high leverage skill set, how to prompt generative AI properly. And specifically, like, how do you, yeah, then it's like the question is, you're building a team, how do you train your team to prompt it properly? Do you do any surfing out in Vancouver area? You get in the wetsuit, 40-degree water.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's cold. You pretty much always have a wetsuit. I actually just got back the other day. I have kind of a background in the snowboard world. I used to compete in snowboarding, so anyways, a lot of my friends from that world live in Whistler or they live in the surf towns here in BC. So I go there pretty often. I was there just the other day, and a bunch of them are my clients. So it's a fun way to get a business trip in too.
John, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And where can folks find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at keepersdigital.com. That's our website. TheMindfulSteward.com is the mindfulness website. There's probably going to be a lot more content coming out there, including a revamp of that podcast that I used to do. But otherwise, you can find me on LinkedIn. If anyone has anything they want to chat about, feel free to shoot me a message on LinkedIn. And, I'm always happy to connect with new people. It's one of my favorite things.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.